94% of the world's population, the policies to which they are subject by their governments. And I'm delighted to see James Shikwati here. He's one of our partners around the world in this exercise. The measure uses, the measure that we use has 38 different measures of policy, which it scores on a 1 to 10 basis. And then that enables us then to rank the countries from best policy to worst policy. And what I'm talking about is how high are the personal income tax rates? Are there are the regulations making it difficult for people to get employed? Are there big taxes on trade? I'm not talking about airy-fairy stuff. When it comes to things like property rights, are the judges independent? Or when you go to sue somebody, do you find that the judge is the uncle of the guy that you're suing? Or that the judge has been paid off by the guy that you're suing? And so on. I mean, these are real issues. When these are important issues to deal with. And we take these measurements from the World Bank and from a variety of sources to produce these rankings. So, how has the Bahamas done in this regard? Well, unfortunately, not well. The Bahamas in 1975 was in the top 20 of countries around the world, where countries like Canada and Hong Kong and Iceland and Ireland and Luxembourg and New Zealand and Singapore and Switzerland and the United Kingdom and the United States are today. It was way up there, as you can see. And during the course of the past, well, in particular from 1975 down to 2000, policy deteriorated. And when we look at the policy ranking for specific areas, we can see where the deterioration has happened. It hasn't happened too much in the size of government. The size of government, although it's becoming less competitive, it's still in the top 20. Regulation is not bad by comparison with other jurisdictions, although I must say that the precision with which we can measure the Bahamas is not as great as the precision with which we're measuring other countries, because the data is not available for the Bahamas. This is a problem which I'll return to a little later. Where the Bahamas has really shone is in the protection of property rights and the rule of law. The Bahamas is an example, as a matter of fact, to other countries as how you can actually improve over a period of time the access to the rule of law and the protection of property rights in a country. In the area of monetary policy, of course, the fact that you've got exchange controls gives you a big black mark on your copybook. Exchange controls are very, very bad. They're bad from every point of view that you can possibly imagine. In particular, they're very bad when you're trying to get capital to come in. You know, I mean, people are not stupid. If you say to them, "Okay, bring your money to us, and once you get it here, it stays here." You know, well, maybe that's not such a great way of attracting money. And in trade, you get bad marks because of your very high tariff rates, 35% tariff rates on imports. And that's a real ime going forward, I think, for your country. And the other one is, well, it's the tariff rate here. I've spun that out, the tariff rate, along with the ranking on trade policy. So that's how the government of the Bahamas, generally speaking, has been doing. And as you can see, there's one good story here, but mostly it's in the wrong direction. The policy is deteriorating gradually over time, and this is not a good harbinger for the future. Now, why am I spending time on this? I'm spending time on it because the quality of policy really, really matters. Let's look globally. Let's look at around the world at these 130 countries that we measure and see what the consequences of different kinds of policy have been in those countries. And what we're doing here is we're showing we take all the countries in the world and we line them up from worst policy. And when I say worst policy, I'm not doing this, by picking this out of the air. What we're doing is we're measuring all of the countries. We're measuring their tax rates, we're measuring their regulations, and so on. And then we're simply taking those measurements and saying, okay, high tariffs, high tax rates, a lot of regulation, a lot of corruption of judges, a lot of problems with inflation and controlling the money supply, that country will go right down at the bottom. Okay, and then we move gradually till we get to a country like Hong Kong, which of course has got some problems, but it doesn't have many problems in the area of economic policy or in the rule of law, in the protection of the assets of the people who invest there and so on. And they're up at the top end. So now we take all of those countries and then we group them into quartiles and say, okay, let's look at the worst, the lowest, the worst performer, the worst policy. Let's look at then the best policy. And what we're going to do is look at a variety of associations with those policies. So here we're looking at, for example, per capita income. So what do we find? We find that, not surprisingly, that countries that have the worst policy and are grouped together, gee, their average income is very low. The countries that have the best policies, you group them together, they have an income which is very high, because good policy produces higher levels of income. The same is true with levels of growth. Here we have actual negative growth in the worst policy countries. From worst policy to best policy, you get an increase in growth as you improve policy. Now here's something very important. The best policy countries are also the ones that have the lowest levels of human poverty. And the worst policy countries are the ones that have the highest level of human poverty. Human development, the United Nations measure. By the way, all of these measures that I'm using here are from the United Nations in one form or another. And this is the United Nations Human Development Index. Once again, the countries that produce bad policy produce bad human development. Why are we surprised? Policy have high quality of human development. Now this one is very important from the point of view of the discussion that we're having here today about healthcare. This is life expectancy. And you know, whatever else can be said about it, you can't have much quality of life if you don't live very long. You know, it's sort of rudimentary. And the countries where there's low quality policy, gee whiz, 60 years. Average life expectancy of 60 years. The best policy, nearly 80 years. And so there's a huge, big, measurable, tangible consequence for ordinary people in their lives from living in an environment where there is good policy because they just live longer. I like to show this one because you know, if there's anything, any people who don't have children, I suppose, can realize that it must be the greatest tragedy that a family can have to lose a child in infancy. And this happens in bad policy countries to the tune of nearly 1 in 10. It's 80 per thousand live births. Whereas in high quality policy countries, there's almost no infant mortality. Once again, I mentioned before about the quality of the water that people drink. Well, one of the things that produces cleaner water is a better policy environment because it produces greater wealth and therefore a greater ability to deal with those kinds of problems. So that's by way of background, that the quality of policy really matters, and it really matters for Bahamians. And we can see the effects of the policy decline that I mentioned before in the results for the Bahamas. We don't have very good data. This is the data coming from the World Bank. Unfortunately, the World Bank doesn't have data beyond about 2000. At least I couldn't find any more data beyond 2000. We've been looking for quite a long time. And even at this moment, when I went to their website last night, there was no new data for the Bahamas for per capita income, real per capita income beyond 2000. But you can see that this is the rank of the Bahamas in the world. In 1970, the